Hello. I'm going to try this again. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties there a few minutes ago, and it took me a while to go through things. Still not entirely sure what happened, but I understand now that it's on. So, Brenda, if you're out there and you can hear me, if you just want to shoot me a confirmation text or something like that, that would be helpful. So maybe in about 30 seconds or so, you'll pick up what I'm doing. Okay. So, all right. All right. Well, welcome everyone to WOW Live. I'm getting the message that we're good to go. Word on Wednesday Live once again. Tonight we're in Lesson 23. We're going to investigate Revelation chapter 18. We're going to see the final and total collapse of the world system, known as Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And the very first verse is of Revelation 18 suggests that we tie this in to chapter 17. Chapter 18 verse 1 says this: "After these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory." So how exactly does this tie in with chapter 17? Well, it says there, the verse opens with the phrase, "after these things." And that refers to those things that we read just last week and the week before in Revelation 17, about the worldwide belief system, the woman riding on the beast. The things in chapter 18 are revealed to John after the revelations that were found in chapter 17. So the things he gets in 18 will obviously follow what he got in 17. We've studied this woman who rides upon the beast. We saw how she represents all the false belief systems of the world, which are united in their rebellion against the one true God. They may differ in lots of other qualitative ways, but that's one thing that they have in common. Not a single one of them lines up with the one true God. Such rebellion as this from the post-flood times begins in Babel. We talked at length about Nimrod, and most especially his wife Semiramis, who was the one who founded the false belief system, which eventually became identified with Babylon, and that united that very first empire. When the languages were confused and confounded at Babel, the essence of what was taught there was carried throughout the world and finds its expression in many different cultures and nations throughout history, even on into today. I don't know the full extent, nor do I know all the ways in which it may happen, but I do believe that there are direct connections between the belief systems, the philosophies, the ideas that people have in this world, and the political powers that run the world. In other words, people run their things in their politics according to ideologies to which they're committed, things that they believe. That's what they do. In fact, I think we see this clearly represented by this woman of Revelation 17. She entices the inhabitants of the earth. She intoxicates them basically with the wine of her fornication, puts them in a stupor so that they're not really fully awake or aware as to what really is going on in spiritual depth. She is riding the beast, which represents the Antichrist and his political system, in his political system and of the tribulation time. That means that she is wielding influence over the politics and over the economy, and she has control over those things. So that's going to be a problem. So after these things, what happens next? Well, we learn in Revelation 18:1 that there is another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Okay? In Revelation 16, we saw how 7 angels pour out from 7 bowls 7 different judgments upon the earth. When chapter 17 begins, it's one of the 7 angels that come to John to tell him this original message about who the woman riding the beast is that he saw. The angel here in chapter 18 is yet another angel. So this angel is different than from the one in chapter 17. Now the Greek word translated another here in verse 1 is the word allos. Pardon me. This is the Greek word allos, A-L-L-O-S, as we spell it with our letters. The word another in English has a couple of different nuances, two different nuances to it, one of quality and the other of quantity. To describe something as having another quality means something that is of a different sort or a different kind than the thing or object to which it's being compared. For example, when you say, I'm going to take another route to the mall, it's not the same route or another of the same route. It's a different route. You're saying you're going to travel a route that is qualitatively different from the usual route, maybe through the country instead of through town. You're going to use different roads to get there. When describing something as being another in quantity, you mean another of the same kind. For example, I'd like another slice of pie, please. That implies that you'd like a second or maybe even a third. Just pass the whole pie over, okay? But it's another slice of the same kind of pie you've already had. Pumpkin, apple, cherry, whatever your favorite is. Blueberry is a good one. I like that. In Greek, there are two different nuances. These two different nuances are better defined because there are two different words that can be translated into English as another. The word heteros means another of a different kind of the road situation or the route situation we talked about. But the Greek word allos here in Revelation 18:1 means another of the same kind, like another of the same kind of pie. Or in this case, another angel of the same kind. I say all that to simply say the language used here is specific and exact, and that's the way the Bible is. You can get down to a word to define what's going on and to understand and interpret it. It helps us to know for sure that this is an angel, a being that has been created by God. This is not an appearance of Jesus Christ. And that's important because when you hear the description of this being, it sounds like it could apply to Christ. Look at those letters in white there, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. Easily could be said about Jesus Christ. But because of the use of this one little word for another there, allos, we know that it's not Jesus. There's only one Jesus. There is no other. But there are angels, multiple angels. And so this is another angel of the same kind of angel that came in Revelation 17. Okay? So this angel has great authority, very brilliant in appearance. We believe the Bible teaches there are different ranks of angels, different levels. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16, helps us out with that. For by him, by Christ, all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. Now, there are thrones, there are dominions, principalities, and powers that, according to this verse, are invisible to us. We have visible ones we can see, but there are invisible powers. The ones populating this invisible realm, they have different levels of authority and rank. We know there are holy angels, and there are also fallen angels that are operating in that realm. So the term angel may well be a broad term that can be used for a broad range of spiritual beings. We don't really have any book or section of the Bible devoted to telling us exactly what angels are, what they're like, how many there are, what kind of spiritual beings are there. We really don't know. It's just whenever an angel needs to be talked about, that's when we find out a little about them. A little window is opened up. In Revelation 18, this is a high-ranking angel, and he's making this appearance to make this announcement. He cried mightily with a loud voice. Things are loud in heaven. And he says this, Babylon the Great is fallen, he repeats that, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. The strength and the power of this high-ranking angel in Revelation 18 is, not surprisingly, greater than human might, greater than in power and strength than human beings. So this is a supernatural being from our standpoint, beyond the nature that we have. And it's a supernatural declaration coming to us, made forcefully, made loudly. It's important and clearly is a truth that comes from God himself. This high-ranking angel, this mighty angel's message is significant, and it harkens back to chapter 17, verse 5. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. She has brought forth a lot of evil in this system that she created and oversees. This Babylon the Great, this is the great false religious system that has itself intertwined with the political system and with the economy of the world during the first half of the tribulation period. In his book, Revelation Unveiled, Dr. Tim LaHaye writes this for us. Archaeologists tell us that Babylon is the cradle of civilization. Located on the shores of the Euphrates River, the ruins of this city have revealed some of the most ancient documents of past generations. This city, begun by Nimrod, who was a rebel before the Lord, a mighty hunter before the Lord, he was in the Lord's face, basically. He authored some of the greatest evils ever to fall on humankind. 2 of these evils will be destroyed during the tribulation period, according to Revelation chapters 17 and 18. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. He goes on to say, in ancient days, Satan seemed to make Babylon the capital of his evil operation. It's almost as if Satan needs a base of operation or sets one up on earth. From this headquarters was started false religion, humanity's attempt for self-government in defiance of God's will. Okay? As we said, they're in rebellion against their Creator. And then city dwellings for commercial and social purpose, contrary to God's command to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth, Genesis 1:28 says. See, there is something that's not good about cities, I think. Not sure, can't be too hard on that, but there's something not right about the cities created on earth. These great evils, which have condemned the souls of millions by substituting counterfeit solutions to natural human problems that would ordinarily lead a person to God. He says a lot right there in that sentence. He says, they will all be destroyed at the end of the tribulation period. And chapter 17 describes the coming judgment of God on the religious system that has enslaved the human race in superstitious darkness for centuries. Very good words there from Tim LaHaye. In Revelation 17, the angel there told John, the beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. Take a look at that image that I have on there. The beast is turning on the woman that's been riding upon it and is attacking her. It says they will bring her to ruin, is what the verse says, and they will leave her naked, they will eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. This sounds something like what happened to Jezebel in the Old Testament when she died. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So the 10 kings are going to give their full allegiance to the beast, the Antichrist, at the outset of the second half of the tribulation, the time known as the Great Tribulation. Hence, they're going to destroy and undermine the power of this false belief system that's been in place ever since the days of Nimrod. I think the reason is that the deception is no longer going to be needed. The world will be getting set up by God for the final confrontation between Christ and Satan. By this time, it's going to be clear to those who have pledged allegiance to the Antichrist who exactly it is that they're serving. They know what choice they're making when they take that mark. It's the son of perdition, the child of hell himself. Why have a belief system then that's designed to deceive people and confuse and confound them when the reality is finally out in the open? It is clearly being known, made known. This final burst of rebellion during these last 3.5 years is going to be a deliberate rebellion against the Creator God, an attempt to overthrow. This is Satan's drive. He wants a kingdom. Thus, that deceptive belief system that Satan had controlled, that culminated in the rise and the worship of the beast, will in the end be destroyed by the beast himself. So, let's take a look at verse 2 once again here. I want you to notice in the proclamation of this great angel, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. The double reference to falling here may well indicate that two entities under the name of Babylon will fall at this end time, even as Dr. LaHaye said that two things are going to come to an end. One of them is the fall of the religious deception under the great harlot, and that's what we saw portrayed in that image a moment ago. The second entity to fall will be the political and economic system of Babylon. The great false religious harlot falls, and with her also will fall the city of Babylon, the capital of politics and economics in the last days. Babylon is fallen, and is fallen yet again. Let's look at that second clause there in Revelation 18:2, telling us that Babylon has become, after judgment, a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Fascinating. There's similar language about judgment of Babylon that's found back in the Old Testament in a more developed fashion. More information is given back in Isaiah chapter 13. Now, in Isaiah's day, Babylon was not yet a world empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, he came a little bit later, about 170 years or so after Isaiah's time. So Isaiah here is prophesying in chapter 13 about the collapse of an empire that is yet to come, that hasn't happened yet. All of Isaiah chapter 13 and the first 23 verses of Isaiah 14 deal with God's judgment of Babylon. It is when we get to the prophet Daniel's time that this prophecy from Isaiah begins to unfold in actual history. Perhaps you are familiar with the incident of Daniel chapter 5, where Belshazzar, a co-regent king of Babylon who rules with his father Nabonidus, Belshazzar throws a big drunken party. The Medes and the Persians are surrounding the city of Babylon that night, but he's feeling confident. We have this great big wall. Nobody can get through this wall, and let's just party. And so that's what he decides to do. But that night, the Medes diverted the river coming in, the Euphrates River, and diverted it momentarily, enough time to give them opportunity to go on the riverbed, come under the city wall where the water flows through, and take the city. This is the original story here of the handwriting on the wall. A hand appeared. It began to write this message from God at the party, frightening all of the drunken people at the party, most especially Belshazzar. The Bible says his knees were knocking in fear. Daniel, who was an old man by that time, was called, and he interpreted the message written on the wall as being given to the king of Babylon. God has numbered your kingdom and put an end to it. Your days are numbered, okay? It's over. Tonight's the night. You're done. You have been weighed in the scales and have been found deficient. That certainly applies to all of us apart from Christ, doesn't it? We all have been weighed in scales and found deficient, but Christ makes up the difference in his grace and his mercy and his love, his sacrifice for us. Isaiah chapter 13, the conquering of Babylon by the Medes, it's historically close to Isaiah's time, though still in the future in his time. But what Isaiah begins to say in chapter 13 and verse 19 and onward is a prophecy about a yet future time of Babylon's destruction, beyond what we just saw in Belshazzar's time. In fact, it's a reference to the very same judgment that we see in Revelation 18. In other words, what's prophesied here in Isaiah 13, 19 to 22 is still future for us right now, from our standpoint. And here's what it says: in Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride, will be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited, nor will it be settled from generation to generation. Nor will the Arabian pitch tents there, nor will the shepherds make their sheepfolds there. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls. Ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. The hyenas will howl in their citadels, and jackals in their pleasant palaces. Her time is near to come, and her days will not be prolonged. Now compare all of that to the language you see in Revelation 18:2. Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. As a result of judgment, the decimated city of Babylon becomes the dwelling place for evil creatures, filthy animals. Think of Babylon as a ghost town, devoid of civilized life and activity. It's dead. Isaiah talks about wild beasts of the desert, owls in the empty houses, ostriches and wild goats, hyenas and jackals. The angel speaks to John about demons dwelling there, foul spirits, and all the unclean and hated birds. A few years ago, I did some research on one of the words found in Isaiah chapter 13, from Isaiah 13:21. Let me just read that to you again. But wild beasts of the desert will lie there, and their houses will be full of owls, ostriches will dwell there, and wild goats will caper there. That last little phrase. From Isaiah 13:21, I looked at that word, translated as wild goats. It is the Hebrew word sa'ir. It's actually pronounced with a little bit of a roll on the R, so I guess you would say it properly. It would be sa'ir, but that kind of trips me up and sounds silly. So the plural would be sarim. Okay, sarim. In the King James Version, this word is translated as satyr, S-A-T-Y-R. You might recognize the satyr as a Greek mythological beast. It's a half-man, half-goat creature. The Greek god Pan is probably the best-known satyr. Got hooves and haunches that are covered in hair, and yet the torso, arms, and head of a man. But then there are the horns of a goat coming out of his head. In his excellent book entitled Powers of Evil, Sidney H.T. Page says this about the Hebrew word sa'ir. Another word often understood as a designation for demons in the Old Testament is sa'ir, with the plural sarim, which literally means hairy one. Appearing more than 50 times in the Old Testament, it most often designates a male goat presented as a sin offering, such as in the ritual on the Day of Atonement, which, by the way, just happened to be this year, just this past Sunday evening at sundown to Monday sundown. That was the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Okay, Yom Kippur. So that and a goat was offered then. He goes on to say here, however, the word sa'ir, it is widely held, occasionally refers to demons, and in such instances is often translated demon or satyr. The latter and he means satyr there, is a particularly unfortunate translation, for the satyrs of Greek mythology are quite unlike the Old Testament serim. And then he has a footnote at the bottom of the page there, which says satyrs were woodland creatures, not desert dwellers. So the seir is not a satyr. Okay? About 200 to 300 years before Christ was on earth, Greek-speaking Jewish scholars who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and Alexandria, of course, was named for Alexander the Great, the Greek conqueror of the known world in that time, they were translating the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek because that's what they spoke. Hebrew was kind of a classical language that no one really used anymore. And this translation of the Old Testament into Greek has proven in our time to be an excellent tool for the study of what the Jews who lived around the time of Jesus, what they thought about their Old Testament and its interpretation, because it came through in this translation that they did. And this translation is called the Septuagint, which means the 70. Some speculate that maybe 70 translators worked on it, but no one knows for sure. Anyhow, the Septuagint uses the Greek word daimonia in place of seir in Isaiah 13:21. You can kind of see it there. The 13:21 is kind of shaded in gray, or a bluish gray on your screen. And, of course, you can see that that's the Greek language there, Greek letters. It's all Greek to me. But I did find daimonia in there, and I put a box around daimonia. It's daimonia. The emphasis is on the daimonia. I guess it is on mo. It's got the accent there, daimonia, in the Septuagint. And it is usually translated in the New Testament as demon. So they are thinking that this means demon back in the first century. In Jesus' time. A Greek reference book by Joseph Thayer has some notes where Thayer says that the daimonia, I'm going to mess it up now, daimonia in the Septuagint is used of evil spirits or the messengers and ministers of the devil. And Isaiah 13:21 is one of the references he cites where this understanding of daimonia is used. What we're seeing here is that in New Testament times, the Jews understood demons to be connected to and related to inhabiting deserted wilderness areas. Not every wilderness area necessarily had a demon, nor was every demon necessarily there, but it was a place to which they were attracted for some reason or other. In other words, they lived in the desert. They went to the desert. In fact, a Hebrew language reference work done by 3 Hebrew scholars, Brown, Driver, and Briggs, defines seir as a hairy demon. Think of goat's hair there. That is, look what it says, inhabiting desolate ruins. This is like a ghost town, right? Like we're talking about, abandoned ruins, like Babylon will become in the future, as we read in Revelation 18, verse 2. A dwelling place of demons. So, what do we know about this? We're talking about the goat here on occasion. What do we know about the goat in Scripture? Well, as we said, it's the animal used as a sacrifice for sin on Yom Kippur, the annual Jewish Day of Covering, or Day of Atonement, which happened, like I said, just this past Sunday into Monday. They don't sacrifice anymore, but it's remembered as a day of atonement and a day of repentance. Either a goat was sacrificed for the people's sins on that day, or the sins of the people were laid upon a goat that was then sent out into the wilderness. There was a casting of lots to decide what they were going to do with the goat. The goat that was sent out into the wilderness or into the desert was called the scapegoat. Now, the goat was pretty much a despised animal in the Bible when you read about it in most places. Think of Jesus on the day of judgment. He separates the sheep to his right hand, which the right hand is the good hand, right? And the goats that were bound for punishment were put on his left side. So that the goat would be associated with the Seir, the hairy demon, who haunts deserted, desolate ruins. That's not too surprising, considering that's the way goats were viewed. And so the Bible views the desert, the wilderness, as a place of testing. It's a harsh place. It's a place where things are difficult, challenging. Think of Jesus, led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. All right, for their rebellion in Kadesh Barnea. See all the people there heading out into the wilderness. The children of Israel were sent for 40 years into the desert, into the wilderness where they were tested. And that generation, because of their rebellion against God, would not enter the promised land. This is where they spent their time. And note how Jesus describes actions that are characteristic of an evil spirit. Interesting that this passage. He's one who would know. He knows the unclean spirits. He says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, Matthew 12:43, when an unclean spirit leaves a man, and he's dispossessed, I guess you would say, he's exorcised, this unclean spirit goes through dry places, arid places, desert, wilderness, seeking rest, and finds none. Unclean spirits head out to the dry places, the deserts, the wilderness. Luke records the story of the demonized man of Gadara, and there in verse 29 of chapter 8, he says this, for he, meaning Jesus, had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. So we have an unclean spirit leaving. For it had often seized this man, and he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds, supernatural strength there, breaking these chains, and was driven, look at this, by the demon into the wilderness. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting, this whole connection. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. There are two aspects of Babylon. Both of them must fall. Spiritual evil permeates the false religious system that came from Babel up through Babylon and has further permeated all godless belief systems of the world. And as the 7-year tribulation comes to a close, that evil religious system of Babylon will collapse through necessary judgment brought on by God in order to prepare the way for the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and his kingdom. This deceptive religious system is the first aspect of worldly Babylon to fall. And the second to fall will be the political and economic system of Babylon. Verse 3 demonstrates how the political and economic Babylon has been dependent upon the religious Babylon, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. It says there, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. They have established a relationship with this system that embeds them into it. They're entangled with it. And the judgment that applies to this belief system will eventually impact them. The nations have swallowed her poisoned drink into their hearts and souls. The world leaders have contracted her spiritually transmitted disease. The economic movers and shakers, they owe her everything. They have become rich on her dime. So, who is temporarily running this whole religious, political, economic machine of spiritual darkness? And it's temporary because we know it's coming to an end. Matthew 4, 8, and 9 tells us the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me. So he has control over the kingdoms of the world, the nations of the world. Even in Lucifer's fall, we see this control over the nations mentioned. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. Notice how it was Satan's control over the nations that weakened them. During this final 7-year period of tribulation, the world system starts to fall apart. It is the collapse of Babylon, the political, economic Babylon, where empire building began in the world, that causes Satan's sandcastle built on a very faulty foundation to start to crumble away. Verse 4 of Revelation 18 says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues.'" Taking part with her is going to put you in danger of judgment yourself. Do you see how this language sounds almost identical to what was said to Israel when the nation was held in bondage in Egypt? Stay separate. Don't participate in what they do. Paul warns us of this very same danger of spiritual compromise with the system of the world, which is basically the same at its core as we've been talking about. 2 Corinthians 6:14-17, he says, "Do not be unequally yoked together, involved, intertwined, entangled together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial or the devil? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore, come out from among them, and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you." We have talked before about God's wrath in response to rebellion, how his wrath is always present. It's part of his nature. He does nothing, however, until it's time. So it's not always manifesting, but it's there and ready to be used when the time comes. And he determines when that time is. And for the world system, its time is going to come one day. And we see in Revelation 18 that the time has now come in this tribulation for the mystery Babylon the Great to come to an end. Her sins have reached to heaven, verse 5 says, and God has remembered her iniquities. She's going to receive a double portion of the pain and anguish which she had dished out. And that's a lot. Verses 6-8, "Render to her just as she rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed," which, remember, she gave to the populace of the world, the inhabitants of earth, getting them intoxicated and drunk and in a stupor. "Mix double for her," it says. "In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow." Go to the complete opposite end of the scale, right? "For she says in her heart, I sit as queen, and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judges her." Now, while I believe that the destruction of this world system is the broader picture here that we're talking about, for it must be removed to make way for Christ's kingdom on earth, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, I also believe the prophecy here is about a particular city, one particular city that will be destroyed in that time. That seems necessary to me because we consider the empty, desolate, ghost town-like ruins which we read about in Isaiah 13 seems to apply to an actual location. So I think that's important. With that religious aspect in mind, some have said that this city will be Rome. Perhaps you see the Vatican there behind the flames, all right, going up in judgment. Perhaps it's Rome, a religious part of this system. When considering the political and economic aspect, some have said, oh, this is New York City, okay? And then some see it as a restored and rebuilt Babylon, an actual city of Babylon that collapses. And for that model serves as a perfect counterbalance, you see, to Jerusalem, the city of God. Recall how we said the Bible in some ways could be titled A Tale of Two Cities. I have no idea which one of those may be correct, if any of them are. Perhaps in some ways they all are. I don't know. In any case, when this Babylon collapses, her fall is lamented the world over because everyone was involved with what she was doing. Revelation 18:9 and 10, the kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her. Not because they're sad for her, but because they're sad for themselves, okay? When they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, like they don't want to get involved now, okay? Saying, alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. This collapse is sudden, almost as though a great explosive destruction has occurred. I think of the fire and the brimstone raining down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Notice how the world leaders mourn at a distance, lest they get caught up in the crossfire of God's judgment. Revelation 18:11-13 says, and the merchants of the earth, the ones who were dealing in business, the CEOs of businesses, the different corporations and their heads of corporations, and the salespersons trying to make money by selling their wares and making deals and everything else. The merchants of the earth are going to weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise anymore. Oh, sorry, merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. This horridly oppressive system of globalistic economics grinds to a halt as no one is buying, no one is selling any longer. This list of goods has everything on it. The most sickening thing is the final item on the list: the bodies and the souls of men. Human trafficking. The rich, the powerful, the few, the elite have built their empires upon the backs of the masses of humanity, and they have felt that they can do with them as they please. I don't want to get into all of it here and now. But folks, there's a truth to the notion that the world system is indeed a vast conspiracy. Quite frankly, in my thinking, I cannot imagine being a biblically believing Christian and not coming to the conclusion that the world is in a conspiracy and rejecting that idea. We just saw Satan is in charge of all of the nations of the world temporarily, but he has them. He offered them to Christ. We've seen the ranks and file. We've talked about that tonight, of the fallen angels, those principalities, powers, dominions, thrones, all in that hidden world, that invisible world, that realm. There's power structure there, and there's a goal in mind. That's conspiring together to accomplish something. It's conspiracy. And don't think for a moment that they don't work with human agencies. See, this idea of conspiracy is not just in the minds of some fringe segment of society. It's fundamental to what the Bible teaches. It's a reality. We hear the power of powerful groups like the Illuminati, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Order of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, the Skull and Bones Society, the Knights Templar, numerous others, undoubtedly hidden members of the Brotherhood of Darkness, as Dr. Stanley Monteith had called them in his book. I believe in a conspiratorial view of history. The devil himself really is in the details, and nothing is being left to chance. Things are decided, they're conspired upon in advance by supernatural spiritual evil, and there's a supernatural order behind the veil overseeing it all, in a battle for human souls. That spiritual battle that defines it. We can't see it happening, but it's there. The battle for human souls, the bodies and souls of men, of women, and sadly of children. It ought to be obvious in 2020 that this system, this world system, has boldly come to the forefront for all who have eyes and ears to see and to hear for themselves. Many of us this year have put on masks, but many other masks, once covering up the world system's movers and shakers, those masks have been ripped off. These people hate God. They hate Jesus. They hate the truth of his word, and they hate his people, and they don't really care if we know. The gloves are off. It's all out in the open. You think of those people who, when they take the mark, decide to do it on purpose. See, in the end, God wins. In the end, God wins. They will not accomplish their goal, these evil ones. The evil, twistedly wicked world mourns over the system that she has lost as the end draws near. Verses 14 to 19. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, which we sold to her. For in 1 hour such great riches come to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the seas, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. See what they value? See what they think is important in life? For in 1 hour she's made desolate. We've all lost because she has fallen. The things that we have witnessed rioters destroying in the downtown streets of a number of our cities this past several months, that will be nothing compared to the judgment that God rains down on the Babylonian wickedness and abominable rebellion. Nothing at all like what we've seen. However, the servants of God, both of heaven and on earth, are to rejoice, for their great enemy, the world system under satanic control, has now come undone. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Here lies mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth, dead of her own greatness. An angel of God delivers her eulogy. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, a tombstone perhaps, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down, and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth. No more music and song, no more art of any kind, as all the richer elements of a culture are destroyed. No more strings of streetlights, not even any stoplights, no digital billboards. All the high rises are dark. No more joy of God's gift of marriage, home, family. For the great men of the earth, the mighty men, the men of renown throughout history, by the cunning of their sorcery, were nothing but confidence men, con artists, deceiving the spiritually lost and blind, lulling them to sleep, dulling their senses, telling them that everything was fine, that all would be well. The defining mark of their beastly behavior was their hatred of Jesus, his word of truth, hating his servants to the point of killing them for their commitment to Christ. It's for this very reason that I personally have chosen Psalm 118:8 as a guiding verse for my life in these days. And verse 9, along with it, tells me to not trust in the leaders of the nations of this world. They're not humanitarian at all in their hearts, living only unto themselves and their own glory. Psalm 118:8 and 9 say this: "It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man." It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. Ultimately, beloved, in your heart of hearts, trust no one but Christ alone. Jesus is coming soon. He will judge all things fairly. Live for him all the days of your life. Make your life mean something to his glory. For the Lord Jesus Christ is indeed the King of all these kings. He is the Lord of all these lords. Those kings and lords are going to fail and fall.